Everyone, and welcome back to the Tuned and Strong podcast. I'm your host, Angela McCuiston of Music Strong, joined by my co-host.
I am Dr. Jen Cabas-May of Tuned and Tone Performance.
And today we're joined by a special guest. She's working on her doctorate. She's not a doctor yet. Is that right?
Not yet.
Okay.
Like 1 year away.
Almost doctor.
Soon to become Dr. Anna Dattari? No, I said that wrong.
No,
Sorry.
It's perfect.
I was all excited to pronounce it the Hungary way, and I ruined it. Sorry. Anna's going to be talking to us today about focal dystonia, continuing on our conversation we had with Mark Wallace. And Anna, can you just introduce yourself? Introduce yourself.
Definitely.
Also, how to pronounce your name and what you're working on with your doctorate and your story, basically.
Yeah, so it's pronounced Dattari, but generally, I study in the UK, and I'm sort of just used to everyone pronouncing it as Dattari, and it's much easier for everyone, so I really don't mind it. Okay. So I'm a flutist. I have my MA from the Liszt Academy in Budapest, and I got focal dystonia in 2010 in my embouchure, and I completely lost my ability to produce a sound. Like, it was completely gone, and it happened over the course of a week. So huge contemporary solo recital 1 week, next week not able to produce a single note on the flute after 16 years of practice and 2 degrees, a bachelor and a master degree. So that happened in 2010. And it took me 4 full years to recover, mostly by myself. So after like 2 years of like depression, clinical depression, and just like forcing everything, I sort of figured out what to do with myself. So another 2 years, I recovered fully and went back to my mostly soloist career. So I did a lot of solo recitals, mostly working contemporary and small chamber stuff. And once I started talking about my story, there was a flute blog in Hungary, and they interviewed me about one of my concerts. And I started talking about the problem and how I overcame it. And I started receiving like tons of emails, calls from people. And some people I knew, and I had no idea that they were struggling with focal dystonia. It's like, how did you do it? So basically what I ended up doing is like, I sat down with each of them, and I started like to sort of like translate my methods, what I did myself, to their specific thing. And it slowly started to become sort of like a coaching business. But at that point, it's like, I really need to know more. I need to have like a scientific background. I can't just rely on my own experience because it's one singular experience. How do I know what works, what doesn't work? So I ended up doing a second master's, which is a master in science at the Royal College of Music, which is performance science. So it's like performance psychology. And I did that master's and then went straight on to my PhD, which I'm currently doing and hopefully finishing in a year at the University of York. And my topic, as always, is musicians' focal dystonia. And what I do in my PhD, I'm not a neurologist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a musician with personal experience. So what I really try to decipher is all the environmental factors, behavioral factors, like practice, that sort of thing, and personality trait psychology, that sort of thing in relation to the condition, which hopefully going to inform treatment strategies, but also preventative strategies as well. So that's what I'm doing for my PhD. And I'm also still coaching musicians for the past 7 years with like increased knowledge. And I did a lot of external stuff like somatic approaches, methods, learned anatomy a lot. And from my own studies, like I just piercing stuff together, which seems to be useful. I go do a course, I learn about this and learn about that, and try to like include that in my own coaching sessions and therapy, and try to help musicians with the condition. So that's basically it. That's my elevator speech.
That's awesome.
Incredible.
That is super awesome. I have a couple questions that I'd like to just kind of unpack if you're okay with it. But the biggest one for me right now is, I know you say you're coaching people. What does that look like for you? Because I know you specialize in dystonia. Are you doing movement experiments, like somatic type work when we're talking about Alexander technique, where you're just physical play? Is it more lifestyle coaching, mental coaching?
I would say it's a mixture of physical movement in connection with the instrument, but there is also quite a lot of mental coaching. And what I work a lot with is the quality of the movement, because once you start to have focal dystonia, there is, and even before, years before, I'm quite convinced, there is a sort of hesitation in the movement due to all sorts of fears and perfectionism. Am I going to do this right? Am I not going to do this right? And there is this constant holding back tension. And then I want to play that note, but I'm not sure it's going to be okay. So there is this constant hesitation and tension associated with the condition. So what I do a lot in my coaching is try to work with the quality of the movement, even if it's the simplest movement, like touching the instrument. And many people with focal dystonia have, in fact, problems with even getting close to the instrument. So very often we start like way off the instrument. We start with like only having a mouthpiece and touching it to their chin or cheeks or the top of their heads, just to teach the nervous system that it is okay to be in touch with the instrument. Because very often when you go through the whole thing, your whole nervous system freaks out by the prospect of playing. So you try to pick the flute up, you all do all the habitual movements, you have the posture, these give all feedback to your nervous system, telling that playing is going to happen. And there are lots of negative emotions, fears, self-hate in that mix, and it all kicks in. So trying to find certain smooth and small movements which don't trigger the symptoms, very much synchronized with the breath, synchronized with very smooth and non-hesitant movements. And then when we have like this little, collection of movement patterns, which can be always performed, which the people can always do, not worry about, then we can start building it towards actually playing the instrument. I hope that answered the question.
Yes. Yeah. And to me, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I've got, I know, Angela, you took dynamic integration too. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that method, Anna. No. It's a German method, but it's effectively taking concepts from Alexander technique with the Feldenkrais space. And it utilizes a lot more physical feedback, not a ton, but that's the basis for it. Just Reader's Digest version. It's more complex than that, but we'll leave it alone.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the way I really approach this is that, when you play the instrument, there are all sorts of different feedback running to your nervous system. It's like the sensory, the motor, the breathing if you're a wind player, but even if you're not, the posture, how your body is positioned, and all that feedback runs into your brain and collects itself in the center, playing the instrument, and presses that big button in your brain, play the instrument. So if you dissect these all sorts of elements and try to address them one by one, like being able to get that sensory feeling on your lips or on your fingers without having any reaction, or being able to move your fingers away from the instrument in a similar way, like if you'd move them on the instrument, and clean that up from the symptom, teaching the nervous system that I can do this, that's perfectly fine, I can do it here, I can do it here, teaching the nervous system that it's safe, and then slowly building those building blocks together, going towards the full, experience of taking the instrument up on site.
I think we have a little bit of feedback coming from your microphone. Just FYI, I don't know if it's close by, if you managed to hit it or something, but it sounded like a wave. That was really interesting.
Yeah. It wasn't me this time. It wasn't me.
But before we get too far into this, because this is really fascinating, because we just jumped right into it. And to anybody who doesn't know, can you give a quick rundown of what is focal dystonia? So people think, oh, I have this, and maybe they don't. But how would you describe what it is?
Hold
on one sec. We can't hear you. And in fact, this is a perfect time for us to take a break for one of our sponsors, and we will be right back with Anna Dystonia.
Hey there. My name is Dr. Garrett Hope. I am a composer, coach, podcaster, and speaker. I've been focused on building my music business since 2014 and helping others build theirs since 2015. I want to tell you about the second annual Ultimate Music Business Summit we are organizing. It'll take place early January of 2022. There will be dozens of presentations with highly actionable content, all of it available to you so you can start your business, grow your business, and ultimately make more money. Because here's the deal. Unless you earn all of your income from an employer, you are a self-employed small business owner. And if you want to do more than survive, if you want to grow your audience, or if you want to impact more people, you have to think and act like a business owner. And that means this summit is for you. This summit will give you real-world, not theoretical, strategies you can implement immediately. You don't need to be stuck with fear or living in your failures. I promise you, with all the teachers lined up, you will get something you've never thought of before. Even though building a business is hard, no one is promising it's easy. It is possible. You just need the right tools and strategies. Tickets for this virtual event will go on sale soon. To be the first in line and to get more information about the summit, presenters, and more, go to musicsummit.biz. That's musicsummit.biz and add your email to the list.
And we are back, and we're talking to Anna about what is focal dystonia.
So musicians' focal dystonia is a task-specific neurological movement disorder. So let me just like untangle that for a bit. So when we say task-specific, it means that the symptoms appear only when doing the specific movement pattern, which is the triggering movement pattern. Of course, there are exceptions. Some people start to experience the symptoms away from the instrument as well. And basically what happens is that you do your familiar movements when you're playing the instrument, and it feels that your body sort of like just forgets how to do it. Certain movement patterns just go off, but it happens in the brain. So it's not a muscular thing, it's not a physical thing. The control system of your brain suddenly starts sending the wrong signals. So what might happen, you might have spasms, tremors, weakness, extreme weakness in certain muscles, so they're being super unresponsive to the signals you try to run from the brain. So after, generally happens to professionally trained and like very high level classical musicians, happens a little bit in jazz as well, but mostly classical musicians. And then the experience is you sort of like pick up your instrument and you suddenly, your body starts to do weird stuff like it forgot how to play. It can happen in the fingers, in the arms, for guitarists, pianists, all sorts of like wind players. Can also happen in the facial structure around the embouchure, in the tongue, and all sorts of like facial muscles. Neck can be also be included, but it can also happen in the shoulder for like string players. I even worked with someone who's a trombone player having dystonia in their shoulder. And also in the foot for organ players or people playing in drum kits. So it can manifest in all sorts of different ways. Basically, the experience that you're losing the fine motor control over a movement which you practiced for a long time into second nature. So it's kind of a very weird experience. And musicians' dystonia is only like one member of a huge family of task-specific dystonia. So you can have a similar condition in like different kind of sports, table tennis, the yips in golf or cricket, or dartitis when playing the darts.
Gymnastics?
Gymnastics, lost movement syndrome, the twisties. The original, like the scientific name for that is the lost movement syndrome. And then we actually like just witnessed one example of that in the Olympic Games, and it like stirred quite a lot of conversation around the topic. But also writer's cramp, it's probably the most known version of dystonia. But as we move on and then certain tasks are not really done that much anymore, we have new ones coming in, like being computer mouse related finger dystonia, for example. So there are all sorts of different things, but musicians are the most vulnerable. And if you look at the statistics, musicians are the ones who get it most, basically.
Is that because of the nature of what we do recruits so much fine motor skill?
Yes, that's partially that. So basically, any fine motor skill, which is a small fine motor movement practiced repeatedly and then performed under stress. So if you put these things together, there are certain things which are like more fall into this category, and playing classical music is definitely one of them. And classical music even more than any other type, because everything is prescribed. You can't just go in a Mozart symphony that, oh, I'm just going to start like half a beat later, I'm going to play G sharp instead of G because I feel like it. You have to be on time, you have to be in the right dynamics, you have to start. Everything is prescribed for us. So with jazz and other types of music, folk music, you have a little bit more leeway, that if you don't feel comfortable playing something, you can play something else that's not considered a failure. But in classical music, it is. So maybe that's why this hyper-focused, very specific task and huge amounts of stress, obviously, associated with it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a lot of it's under stress. That's that other component.
Yes,
that can cause this.
Yeah.
Stress is a
And I would like to venture too, because I have a foot in the jazz door also. I observationally, because I don't want to get in trouble for making a statement that's, but observationally, experientially, I feel like classical musicians are also more prone to it because of the personality variance between, like, there's a divergence in personality. Jazzers have a very specific type of personality, even if they are like the super high performers where it's like, this is happening at this time, especially contemporary jazzers, but they're typically not the same version of high strung that a lot of classical musicians are. And I say this as somebody who gets high strung quite frequently. It's just a little bit different, even if they are very task focused. That's just my experiential seasoning.
Absolutely. But you can basically say, like, why does someone go towards jazz and why does someone go towards more like classical? So right at the beginning, it can be like, what is your taste? What fits your personality better? So that's also like a selection. I wager that some of these personality traits are also infused by the environment. So you end up with a lot of classical musicians who are a little bit like more rigid and more that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
It's going to have a huge influence on how you develop, especially when you start doing this whole thing, taking it seriously from like high school ages, very vulnerable age, everything changes. Or you end up with a bunch of jazz musicians and your teacher is also super cool and they don't. That social effect is also going to have a huge impact on how you develop your personality. So it's also like partially which direction you go towards and also like the impact of that social environment can have teachers and stuff, peers.
Yeah. So we're getting into like a lot of these psychosomatic things, basically, is what we're talking about here. I want to backtrack and I apologize if I'm derailing things. I'm just like, as we're talking, I'm like, well, if I was an outsider listening, what would I want to talk about? What would I want to ask? And I know that for me at the time when I was injured and didn't know it was wrong, I looked into all sorts of things. I had my diagnoses, but when you have an injury for so long and you're being diagnosed with one thing, but it's not getting any better, you start questioning the diagnosis. So if I were back then listening to this podcast now, I think my question would be, well, you talked about things like the tremors, like anxiety, like seizing, or just problems with approaching the instrument even. But I did not have dystonia. I had some overuse issues, a lot of overuse issues, but just a lot of muscular imbalances. It still meant that by the time I was at the height of my injury, I couldn't hold my right arm. I'm a clarinetist. I couldn't hold my right arm in playing position without it shaking violently. But like, if you're listening and you're wondering, like, well, do I have dystonia or do I have tendonitis? If you have dystonia, you're going to know. I'm pretty sure. You can have the same symptoms, but like what you're talking about with the lack of control on a neurological level, where your body just is doing weird things, versus I can do this still, but it really hurts.
Yes, absolutely. And then we also have to say that dystonia is also like a spectrum disorder. So it can go to extremely severe, like with me, my face just forgot how to play. It's just like gone.
In the space of a week.
Yeah, in a space of a week. It can happen. It happens actually much more with embouchure because with your fingers, you are much more used to do all sorts of different tasks. So if something doesn't quite work out, you have sorts of ways to do compensatory movements and still make it happen. But with your face, you have all these small muscles in your face, and then you're not really conscious how you're using your vaccinator, oral these muscles. And one goes, you don't really have that reach into the system that, okay, if it doesn't work this way, I'm going to work it that way. So that's why I think that amateur is much more vulnerable to a much quicker type of onset. And with finger, you can literally play years, because you sort of figure out, okay, if I can't do it this way, I'm just going to do it that way. So with that, but answering the question, so yeah, it's a spectrum disorder. So it can be quite subtle as well, like literally not being able to control one finger or control one specific range. For example, your face is just so stuck in one position that you can't access your low range, but you can still play up in the high range, or you can't access your tonguing, but you can still play legato. So there are all sorts of different variations. But my advice in general would be, if you suspect that this is going on, go check it out with a neurologist. Mm-hmm. Because there are other things. You can have like an early onset Parkinson's. You can have a brain tumor even. You can have, I worked with someone who had a small tumor on their jaw, and it pressed on a nerve and it produced dystonia-like symptoms. It's very important to check out all these things, because you don't want to start working on your musician's focal dystonia if you have another much bigger underlying issue. You want to get that checked out.
Do not self-diagnose.
Yes. Self-research, but always get an opinion. Yeah.
It's always better, even though a neurologist is probably going to reach for the needle and try to give you botulinum toxin injections, which in my opinion doesn't work at all. But it's still like being able to rule out other much more serious conditions. It's quite an important step on this road.
Yeah.
So I want to backtrack a little bit. When you were talking about the different areas of the body that can have focal dystonia, I have a former client that has developed it. She's a guitarist, and she's going to be listening to this, so I know she's got all these questions, so I'm going to try to ask them to you, because she's got a type of dystonia that I wondered when I first started working with her if this was what it was, because it kind of sounded like it, but it also sounded like an imbalance, and it sounded like a cross between muscle imbalance and dystonia at the same time. And if you look at the posture of how she plays, she's very much like this when she plays. It's not pretty. And she'll tell you that. And what she found out of is she has dystonia in her neck back here, which I had never heard of, she had never heard of, and nobody else seems to have ever heard of. So she's not getting a whole lot of help. All she's doing right now, she said, she's getting some Botox injections as just a try. And I asked her the other day, how's it going? And she said, I don't know that it's helping the focal dystonia, but the pain is gone. And I feel like I have a whole new neck. I can move like I couldn't move before. So that's a small victory for her, but it doesn't fix the problem. And Mark was going to talk about that, and he didn't want to go down that way. Like find what are the options for you, because what works for somebody might not work with somebody else. And like she said, it's not helping the neurological part, but it is giving her more freedom of movement that she didn't have before. But now she's like, she had to cancel everything. She doesn't have a job right now. She can't play her guitar at all. And I don't remember if it was pain or just she can't play. Nothing happens. I mean, I've never heard of having dystonia in the neck. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because we've talked about, fingers and the fine motor places, but these bigger areas, what kind of happens in those areas when that happens?
It can happen. And first, let me start with saying that I never seen a musician's focal dystonia client who didn't have muscle imbalance and didn't have horrible posture. So I never seen anyone who had, a very nice posture and a very nice, broke out body and like balanced muscles and have dystonia on top. It nearly never happens. Like I still, waiting to come across someone. And I do a lot of postural work in my sessions as well for multiple reasons, which I might go down that road, but not right now. I'm first going to try to answer your question. I did work with an oboist who she said she had embouchure dystonia. Basically what happened, she couldn't even play the reed on her lip because her neck was going crazy when she was approaching. And then we did a lot of like breathing exercises stuff, and then be very conscious of the posture, and then did a very similar work of just keeping an eye on how her neck reacted in the presence of the instrument, when lifting the arms, when all sorts of different things. But we have to make a differentiation between task-specific and non-task-specific dystonia here. Because you can have the symptoms all the time. You can have focal dystonia, and I know that this term is like very loosely used around musicians' focal dystonia. Musicians' focal dystonia is a task-specific focal dystonia. But you can have focal dystonia. They're the symptoms present all the time, 24/7. And that's a whole different area. It's a whole different thing. And most of the stuff I'm doing is really reacting to the symptom in relation to the instrument, like calming down the symptom in relation to the instrument. When a symptom is always present, that's a whole different thing. And I generally don't like to work with people like that. I generally like try to send them to people. There is one person in Canada, Joaquin Farias, who works with focal musicians dystonia, but he also works with all sorts of types of dystonia as well. So that might be something to look into.
Can you spell his name for us? Because the transcript went nuts with that name.
Farias, like Farias.
Mhm.
Okay.
And he's a pianist with a DMA, but he's been working with musicians. He started working with musicians, and now he just sort of expanded his like repertoire. And he also has an online platform where he offers all sorts of like exercise courses, starting from like dancing to martial arts exercises to support people with all types of dystonia, like bigger muscle dystonias as well. So it might be something to work. I personally don't dare to work with that, because my whole retraining strategy is that you have a problem, your body, your nervous system has a problem with the instrument, with playing the instrument, and associate stress and emotions and fears, and your body reacts to the instrument. But if your body is like sort of reacting all the time, I don't dare to touch that at all.
Yeah, and there are, like you said earlier, there are so many different types of dystonia, task specific versus non too, and one that I don't know why, something is just telling me to actually put it out there. But I have heard that one that is not, it's common, but it's not frequently discussed per se in athletics, is runner's dystonia in the foot. And that's considered a task specific one. So I can see that being something that like maybe even dancers would have and would have to work around, and maybe not even necessarily know. Although they're on their feet so much, I bet they do. So
Yeah.
like I said,
there are actually articles published about ballet dancers with dystonia and flamenco. And I heard about tap dance dystonia as well. I haven't seen any scientific research on that, but I've seen papers on flamenco and ballet.
Yeah. Our research in performing arts disorders is really just, I mean, it's been going on for at least 50 years, but it's really just starting to take off. Just starting to take off for all intents and purposes in a mainstream way. So
Anyway.
yeah. Go ahead, Angela.
Yeah,
I'm going to backtrack.
I totally forgot what I was going to say. Just go for it.
Okay. Sorry, that's my cat. He has opinions. It's very loud and very special. So featuring Heimdall.
Special one.
So I wanted to, if he will let me, backtrack to the onset of your dystonia, if you're comfortable talking about that. I know you said it happened within a week. Looking back, because I know probably in the moment it felt like it was just gone. But looking back, would you say that there were indicators that if you were looking at yourself now, like from this perspective, looking at your younger version, were there indicators that you would have gone, oh, this is going to become a problem very soon?
Not in a modern way, not in my embouchure, but mentally and like stress-wise, that was years in the making. I mean, from high school, I was the little prodigy, and when I started playing the flute, I was a pianist first from like 5 years old, and I picked up the flute when I was like 9 or 10 and just like went like that, like, you know, competition, this, blah, and specialized high school. And then we have these specialized high schools in Hungary where everything's built in the schedule, like from music theory to music history to your flute lesson, everything is like built in your normal like classes in the morning. And then you have one teacher and you rely on that one teacher. And I was unlucky enough to have an absolutely horrible teacher for 4 years. And that's like super vulnerable phase, like 14. And by the time I exited that school, I had a lot of problem with my jaw clucking and lots of pain and tension in my face during those years. At one point, I was like third year, I lost like the last like 5 notes. I couldn't produce them under G because I had so much tension in my face. I just was like that. But that was all like mental tension. And then I went on, I got a better teacher, I got a bit more relaxed. But that kind of like perfectionism, high level anxiety all the time, super high performance anxiety, and also like personal things going on, very severe like personal things going on in my family life, in my personal life. And then there were a couple of things happening like not right before the onset, which was just extremely upsetting. So I would say, looking back, that I was like on the verge of a clinical depression for like a year before my onset. I just kept going because you keep going, because I was invited to play concerts. I went and did play concerts. So on a mental level, definitely. I wouldn't say that I experienced any particular thing around my embouchure the year before the onset, but looking back, I did have quite a lot of like, what is going on here? How shall I do it? Focused this way, that way, problems around my embouchure before, like years before. So I think all of these things just added up. So I really feel that the overwhelm just like comes, and then you have the last drop and the whole thing breaks. But I'm pretty much convinced that this is for everyone. This is years and years and years of stress and experiences and traumas. And very often people do report all sorts of traumas or major changes in their lives prior to the dystonia, like death of a close relative, or change of homes, or accident, or even physical injury, and then they have a physical injury and just keep going on. So it's that breaking point, but it's definitely years and years of maladaptive practice and mental difficulties for sure.
Yeah.
So going on, that makes perfect sense. And that aligns really well with what Mark was telling us from his personal experience. And he's a very perfectionistic type. His personality is very perfectionistic, very type A, very like obsessive. He's got some OCD kind of things he'll tell you about. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, he just puts a lot of pressure on himself. And then he had another teacher that put that pressure on him as well. So that's making a whole lot of sense, the way you're talking about this, that it's also starting from mental as well, and that stress response. So that's fascinating. I mean, that's something we haven't really heard about, like how the physical and the mental are coming together to produce something like this. That's
like you basically have a certain kind of mindset. Like in my thesis, I'm actually questioning where that mindset's coming from, because part of your mindset also comes from the environment, and then your upbringing and how your teacher behaved towards you, because you learn so much more from a teacher in a professional like education than just playing. You learn how to treat yourself, you learn how to practice, you learn how to think about your own art, think about your own expression, your own creativity. You learn all these things, you pick them up, and then you have this kind of mindset, and that basically prompts you to do certain behaviors which might not be very healthy. And then things are not working out because of anxiety, and then you start to sleep less, and you start to not take care of yourself because everything is just a practice, and then something comes and it breaks the back of the camel, just like the last straw. So it's definitely a very, if we just change this perspective, because currently it's looked at from a very, very strict neurological perspective, looking at genes and brain scans and things like that. But the brain is plastic. So everything we do, the way we practice, the way we think, it's going to make changes to your nervous system. It's going to change how it's wired. So we can't just say that something is just neurological or just psychological or just this or just that. These all intertwine. And if you really want to understand how it starts and how to treat it and how to stop it from happening to new generations of musicians, we really have to have this very holistic approach and look at all these puzzle pieces, because they all need to be in place if you end up with focal dystonia.
Yeah, and even if you don't, because like I said, mine was overuse and just really bad. It was overuse paired with bad overall body use. But it wasn't dystonia. I could still play. It really hurt. And then there was a point where my body just gave out, and it was physical give out. But I know we've talked about this in a previous podcast, Angela, but that concept of, if the body knows something is wrong, mind knows something is wrong, subconscious, something is wrong. And if you can't feel it, it's going to try to find a way to tell you.
Yeah.
And it's going to manifest it in whatever way gets your attention most. And if it starts somewhere, because that's where you feel physically something going on most easily. So for me, it was right here, because felt my hands just fine, but like all this locked up, but it took, it had to work its way up and be like, no, something's wrong. Something is really wrong. And how much has to go wrong physically before I get your attention? Mm-hmm. But I would say, looking back, it was diagnosed as a physical issue. Well, yeah, but I was also one of the tallest kids in my class growing up. I was super introverted. Mm-hmm. I was doing dance since I was 3. But again, being one of the tallest girls out there in a ballet class, you're very aware of how tall you are. You're put in the back, because you're so tall that the itty bitties need to go up front to be seen. Logically, you understand this, but as one of the bigger girls, and especially because then I got broader and a little heavier too, like this. Yeah. Like, don't look at me, I fit in. And then being an empathetic soul too, everybody being shorter, I find myself drawing down to where they are so I can be with them. And I noticed it first when I was hanging out with my super tall friends. Like, all of a sudden I'm like, we're walking around somewhere or whatever. And I'm like, why does my back hurt so bad right now? And I'm like, because I am stretched to my tallest, because my friend is 6'4" and I'm only 5'7". I'm like, oh, I really just have a natural disposition to try to meet people where they are. Being taller was a disadvantage because I was already like this. Yeah. But that's a psychological thing, like lack of confidence, all that. It just, they work together.
Definitely have an impact on, like, what is up in our minds.
Yeah.
But with me, I was a little chuffy girl when I was 4. It was like a little extra fat, with like this puberty thing. And I was desperate just to suck my tummy in all the time. And that obviously created like a whole different, like, I changed the way I held my pelvis. Mm-hmm. And it became this like kind of like pushing my butt out too much and overarching my lumbar spine. Because like trying to hide my tummy, which I thought it was big. Now I, look back and like watch pictures and like, girl, come on. But yeah. that conscious, like, try to hide myself, it's very similar, but also I'm afraid, I'm not sure I can do this. I'm going to hide, I'm going to pull in, I still need to be there, but if I have, something threatening, someone is, going to tell me that I'm not talented enough, I'm going to make a mistake, going to tell me off, I'm going to try to hide myself. It's just so normal from the brain and body to work together, like they try to protect you, and obviously going to end up with the horrible posture. The same thing, I just like really want to do this right, and this is the other thing I see with everyone's like meeting the instrument. There's like flutists are just so horrible at this, right? They go like, and they're like, out here, and they wonder why their necks and back hurts, and then why this whole, because it has a huge impact on how this whole like jaw thing works. Mm-hmm. Pushing everything forward, and now pull and go back to your embouchure.
Yeah. So, I see that too, and I'm a flute player, and when I teach, it's like, no, you bring the instrument to you. You don't go to meet it. Bring it to you. I've got one kid right now that's just, I'm only teaching 2, so that's Because I transitioned out of teaching middle school and high school, and now I only teach college level, which is a nice break. But this one child, we've talked about it. I've taken her picture and been like, do you see this? She goes, oh, yeah, this is not okay. So we have to work on this because she punches and then, because your neck can only extend so far. I'm like, bring it to you. And then she does. And we're talking about, dangling from the ceiling and feeling tall and light and all these things. And then she gets into it and she's back hunching, a troll again. And it's just, yeah. And I want to be able to tell her, if it doesn't hurt yet, how do you make that connection of this could be really bad?
Yeah, it's going to hurt her in like 10 years time, and it's by the time it's such a strong habit that it's super hard to take care of. I see a lot of ambulatory dystonia sufferers with that kind of posture and that kind of habit, and then sometimes I have to extend them down the ground, and then they do their exercises lying down when you have feedback on the floor, and they feel when they move their head, and just like touching the head joint to their face and like doing breathing exercises while being on the ground, because it's such a strong thing going on that the only thing which helps is just the feedback, because the proprioception is just way off. They can't tell where their bodies are in space. So it's very, very interesting.
That's a great idea, because she also has that perfectionistic, I practice 7 hours a day mentality. And I'm like, no, ma'am, stop. You're only allowed to practice she's like, well, I got to warm up for an hour before our lessons. I'm like, no, you don't. No, there's warm up. What do you have to warm up? We're going to a lesson. You're not performing for a thing. So, but she's just got this, we're talking about the personality again. And it's not like I would need to break her of her personality. That's not what I mean. But there's a way that you can, shape and mold that personality into something good instead of going down the opposite.
Yeah, beneficial for them and for their playing and.
Yeah, and so much of that, in my experience, again, is coming from just a lack of self-trust, And it's like, but again, that goes back to, we tend to want to separate out physical work from psychological work. I'm like, you can't, which is, my physical training classes, my coaching group. We operate out of a commercial gym. And when I started at this particular gym, a lot of the guys who are just there to lift, they're doing their own thing. They're doing like hard, heavy metal stuff, they're looking at us like we're nuts. Because it looks weird. I'm like, we start every session, you're going to lie on the floor and you're going to feel your low abs. And that's it. And it's very gentle and it's very slow, but that's what we're going to do, because if you cannot use your low abs to extend yourself upwards and outwards and create a very wide base, forget putting any sort of weight on your back. You're going to hurt yourself. I'm not doing that, And so like, they're looking at me like I'm nuts. And now we're, how long have I been there? I think we're just shy of 6 months, and they're starting to go, oh, not my clients, the people observing. Oh, she's crazy and her stuff is weird, but her people are moving some weights. I'm like, because they can feel their bodies.
Exactly.
They can feel their bodies, not their bodies can do the thing, The
low rep, like the transversus abdominis, it's extremely important that the timing is right. So it needs to turn on before you do anything.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're not turning it on, they're turning it on late. So a whole other like muscles start to jump in to take over that load, because it's, we are not safe.
Right.
And just like feeling it, that like being able to turn that on, that like force muscle, the transversus is like, okay, on, now I can lift my arm and hold my instrument, and maybe I can hold it straight without having a pain, like here and there and there and there.
Yeah. I can trust the base part of myself. And if we're going to get super woo-woo here, the base of the chakra system, if we will, which I love. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, but I love it. It's super applicable. I'm not apologizing for it, but but if you trust the base of your system.
All systems have different ways to describe similar experiences, and whether we call it chakra or we call it pelvic floor, or we call it this and that. It's just different ways of explaining away an experience without the vocabulary, which was,
Yes.
understood during that time period. So,
Yeah.
right. So is there no like right and wrong, like there are no chakras, like this is something they experienced and described in a way everyone around them understood, and then
Right.
why use it. So I'm just
Right. I mean, we use all sorts of in our instrumental teaching, we use all sorts of things that we know are physiologically not perfect, but they get the correct result. I'm like, why are we not doing that with physical stuff? It's okay. Maybe not all the time, but it's okay.
And like we were talking about this with Mike the other day, words have power, and when you say things out loud, don't you sometimes feel that in certain areas of your body? I mean, I was doing some work with him the other day and he said, where do you feel that? I'm like, that feels like something like a band around my head, or that feels like here. You can't tell me the chakras thing is not a thing. I remember there was a time where I was going through some stuff with my now ex-husband, and I felt it was the literally craziest thing. I lost my voice. Literally, I couldn't speak. I don't know. It didn't hurt, but I couldn't speak. And my counselor at the time was like, "Do you feel like you don't have a voice?" That metaphor is manifesting physically. So, I mean, there is definitely what's the word? These things are not separate.
Yeah,
it's
Parts of your body are
psychosomatic, or
not
not even psychosomatic, because that implies a physical manifestation of a psychological issue, and not that the two are working together. We need a new word. Anna, do you have a new word?
The body works together, mentally and physically and emotionally.
When it comes to dystonia, people are generally like super sensitive when you like pronounce the word psychological, because it's been treated as hysteria until like the 1970s. Had the narrative behind it that it's your fault. And to be honest, most people with focal dystonia do feel that it's their fault. They blaming themselves in their head already, so they don't need another source from the outside telling them it's their fault. And then when they actually started detecting the different like changes in the brain areas from like the 1970s, 80s, 90s going on, it was a relief for many sufferers, because they could think, oh, it's not my fault. This is happening. My brain is doing here. But like what I'm trying to do with this word is that basically your thinking patterns, your emotions, your reactions to your external world, how you move your body, they all have an impact on your system. Does it make it your fault? No. Not. And like being psychological, I've even heard like one of the leading scientists on the field, Professor Eckhard Altemüller, talking on the PAMA conference, the Performing Arts Medicine conference about focal dystonia, just like 2 months ago, calling it psychosomatic.
Oh no. Oh no, she froze.
Hold on. Anna, hold on. You froze. You froze. And you lost your statement. No. Darn technology.
Am I back now?
You're back now. You were talking about he used the word psychosomatic.
That if someone with dystonia listens to this, it can be extremely hurtful, because they put their own narrative behind it. Psychosomatic, psychological means it's, and that's the distinction where we have to make, that just because there are psychological elements included in this mix, that doesn't make it anyone's fault. Because many people think about, oh, I should have practiced differently, I should have done stuff differently, I should have paid it and blah, blah. But you couldn't. You did the best what you could at that any given moment. You acted based on the best information which is available for you. It's not like you tried to do your best. So it's not your fault. The information, the environment wasn't ideal. It matched up with your genes and everything which happened to you. This is the result. Question is, what are the things we can now do about it? And part of that journey is definitely like thinking about psychological issues, thinking about the perfectionism, thinking about the anxiety, all sorts of different things. How can I get my system to release some of that to be able to work with the symptom itself? Because it's so overwhelming. And of course, the trauma of losing your ability to control your body, that's huge as well. So resolving that is also a huge part of this picture. So when we say like all these like kind of psychological, psychosomatic, I just really want everyone who listens it is to understand that. Just try to get that from that narrative that it's my fault. It's nobody's fault, really.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that, because that's I did not, I know neither of us meant anything involving blame or anything like that when we're talking about this, which is part of why I was wanting a different word for it. And I know sometimes for me, like, I'm having a hard time a little bit going back to working with baby beginners, which I just started. It was like one of those shock moments where it's like, okay, we're just going to do a mini session. And the response, I'm like, oh, they have zero foundation. I need to reset my brain because I've been working with people who have a foundation and now they don't, And so for me, it's like when we're talking about this, I've done enough work in it that, of course, personally, I have removed fault from issue. But thank you for bringing that up, because if you're listening, there is no fault if you're dealing with this.
Oh my gosh, musicians, so many times we blame ourselves for injury, which is silly.
Yeah.
Right. It's the history of the condition and how it was narrated and what people were told when they went to neurologists, like all of that issues around it. So it's like very heavy with that history as well in focal dystonia. So
Yeah.
And injury is the same. It's like I've met musicians blaming themselves for tendinitis or.
Yeah.
Oh, as we
did that
talked to
too.
Veronica. Yeah. And you said that, she said that, she's like, oh, I should have known better than to get injured. What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What? I mean, that statement, I should have known better than to get injured. Why are you putting that blame on yourself?
Yeah.
I mean, when you put it out there in regards to anything other than musicians, it sounds ludicrous. But musicians say this to ourselves all the time. Oh, I should have known better. How should you have known better? Why should you have known better? Also, why is that your fault? There's so many other things at play here.
Absolutely. And then it comes to education, and there are quite a few programs starting about musicians' health, and then you would, with all these concerns and all this research being done in the past 40, 50 years, in the UK, we have this Healthy Conservatories network doing, research and master classes, all sorts of different things. And I remember when I moved to the UK, having done my master's back in Liszt Academy, I graduated in 2007 and then came to the UK, and I started hearing all about this, like mental health and, healthy bodies and Alexander Technique lessons for free at the Royal Project Music. I was like, what? And first, first like, oh, we want to take care of your mental health. I was like, oh, I'm not crazy. Leave me alone. But like the whole different narrative, like you have to take care of yourself in all sorts of different ways to perform to you. It was not a concept I met while I was in my education. So
I think we got the gist of that, but your computer froze again.
Zoom is fighting us this week really hard.
The internet needs to go home. It's drunk. So, okay. So before we go too far down that path, because we could spend all day, I think there, I know more than likely, I'm going to guess the burning question is, how do you come out of focal dystonia? How do you get to where you can play again? I know this is not a simple answer, but people are looking for hope. They're like, I don't think it's been a death sentence for so many musicians for so long. We've been told, if you have focal dystonia, you'll never play again. Learn to be a dentist or something. Maybe you should switch careers because you're never going to play again. And you're saying, yes, absolutely, you can come out of this. You are out of it. You help other people get out of it. What are some things that you can tell people how or what they can do?
Yeah, so it's what I find through my own coaching that there are a couple of factors which play into this. How long have you had the dystonia, and how old are you? Because if you're 60 and you have had the dystonia for like 40 years, it's going to be much more difficult if then you're like 23 and you had it for like 6 months. So there are certain differences on this scale. I don't really want to say it's absolutely impossible for someone who's older or someone to have had it for a longer time. I just recently finished the sessions with a 71-year-old client with embouchure dystonia, and he just like plays okay now. He's not back to his like orchestral musician level, but he's happy and that he knows from this point on how to go on. So I'm not saying it's not possible, but there are different levels of severity. There are different levels of like, and with the age, it's really just like how plastic your brain is, how like open are you to change, but also mentally how much you can take in new concepts and try new things. So this is what I find. But having said that, so like that's again a whole different spectrum. I tell everyone that the taking care of their mental state and headspace is extremely important, because you can't really start observing what your body is doing, the fine motor movements, creating exercises for yourself if you're an anxious mess. It's just not happening. So I recommend everyone to get a good therapist, or start meditating, or do Tai Chi, or do yoga, or like use all sorts of different tools. There are so many amazing tools out there. General posture, general how they use their bodies, extremely important in many ways. I do a lot of postural work in my sessions. It's important not just because body mechanics and you have a better position to put yourself in when you're playing the instrument, but it also helps to break the habit as you approach the instrument. So if you spend a lot of time always, opening the case, every musician does that. Like if you're in an orchestra, everyone's like opening call. Like you pick up the instrument, play a second octave C, chromatic scale down, a seventh chord up, and that's the first thing they play. So we have this like ritual approaching, playing and warming up and everything. So having postural corrections can also help with breaking that, so you don't go down the same road over and over again. So I generally create a small new routine to people. So before we do anything on instrument or any exercise, playing, non-playing, we have a small ritual of checking posture. Just very simple, just sitting on the sitting bones if you're sitting. If you're standing, just like really feeling your ground, aligning a little bit, like know where your pelvis is, just lengthening your neck a little bit, just a little bit of difference. And then we move on from there. So new routine. You can't pick up your instrument the exact same way you've been picking it up for the past 25 years and expect a different result. It's not going to happen. And then when it comes to the actual physical exercises, I think that the really important thing is that treat your body and your body's reactions like you'd be treating a child who's afraid of a monster under the bed. So if it gives you a reaction, there is a reason for it. If it freaks out, if it comes back with the trigger, the symptom, or any bad feelings, you have to be patient and then try to do less and try what is the thing you can still do. Because if you keep forcing, it's not going to come down. So you can't shout at a 3-year-old, there are no monsters under the bed, because it's going to freak out because you've shouted on top of that fear.
And we just missed the very last thing you said.
Yeah, cool. This time I spotted that you also froze, so.
Good. So you said you're going to, you said to be patient and do less because no monsters under the bed, because they're going to be freaking out. And we lost you.
Yeah, exactly. So finding a set of movements, no matter how small they are, which resemble playing the instrument, and keep doing that patiently, and then put one toe over the line and see how much more I can do, and integrate that step or that movement into the comfort zone. If that's comfortable, I'm going to go on one more step. And I work a lot with the breath, especially with use a lot of just conducting the breath, observing the natural breath, and do a lot of the work on the out breath, because it's going to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest. So if something's scary, like if I need to reach out and touch the instrument, I'm going to tune into that breathing. Oh, yeah. I'm going to tune into that breathing, and I'm going to use my out breath to do the tricky thing, putting my fingers on the key, touching the instrument to my face. So just really observe and discover what are the things which I can always do. I'm still super comfortable with doing them, and keep doing those. And it's kind of the opposite of the classical musician mindset. We are very, very problem focused. So we go like, okay, I'm just going to put the big red circle around that bit in the music. That's what I need to practice. So we go for the problem. But this is quite the opposite. We have to be comfortable with whatever we're doing and adjust the task to our comfort, which is super hard because who cares how I feel? I got the note right. I don't care if I break my spine in half by doing that, but I got the note right. That's the general thinking. So you really need to switch that and make sure that whatever you do is comfortable. And then you can keep, for me, it was literally just like sitting and just allowing a little wisp of air escaping between my lips. I was like doing this. I was going to teach, I was teaching like small kids. That was the only thing I could still do because obviously my concerts were off. Sitting on the tram, going there, and just keep doing the same calm movement with the same intention, the same direction, synchronizing with the breath if you can. And then once it feels secure, simple and natural, and there are no hesitation in that movement, I can maybe get my head joint up to my face and do the same thing, and maybe on my chin, and maybe on my lip, and then one step at a time, but always observing how I feel, because the moment my body reacts, it triggers the symptom, I need to take a step back. Yeah. So basically that's the underlying idea. It's a long work. It's a long and it needs a lot of patience to actually go through this process. But what I usually tell my clients that you want to pick up your instrument and you want that note to be there. By forcing your body and figuring out that, okay, if I do it this way and if I do it that way, it's going to work out. You're not going to reach that point. You won't be able to relax back from that amount of tension. You need to build the calm in order to get the calm. What you practice, what you get. So so basically these are the main things. And again, take care of general posture, do yoga, do Alexander technique, do physical training, take care of your body, sleep. Because sleep plays a huge role in all this thing. Your brain puts information together while you're in sleep. It regenerates while you're in deep sleep. If you don't get that, it's like having the half of what you've been doing during the day. If you don't give that space to your brain to digest the information.
Yeah.
So and one quick thing.
Go ahead.
So when you were talking about putting this is for amateur dystonia, like you're breaking the pattern by putting the head joint different places and doing different motions. What do you find for people who have it in their fingers? I'm thinking of a bass player I know. Every time he picks up the instrument, his fingers curl in like this.
I would start.
Oh, hang on.
Basically.
Oh, we lost you. We lost you right after his fingers curl in. So beginning of your response.
Basically, you start the same way. Ask the question, what are the things you can still do without having the symptom? It might be that I'm going to turn that bass. I'm going to stand up in my playing posture, maybe correct my playing posture as I stand. And I'm going to turn that bass and I'm going to place my fingers flat on the other side of the neck. My brain receives a different kind of feedback because it's not the strings. The bass is the wrong way around. It doesn't make any sense for my brain to give a reaction, right? And I'm going to start with flat fingers. And then I can do like repetitions with flat fingers. And then I try to do it on the strings. Flat fingers on the strings, not curling them. Other side. Going. Once I'm comfortable with the moment, I can start curling them into the fist, touching it with a fist, and then start to find middle ground between completely flat and completely fist. Like touching a little bit more, like this, like that, moving all the fingers together. Once I have that moment when the sensory thing, sensation, and me standing with
the internet, man, today, I tell you what. I don't know what's wrong with the internet today, but
yeah. Yeah. And I love that my Zoom always tells me that your internet connection is unstable after it happened.
Oh, of course.
this
Of course.
is how I know that I am back, that it tells me that connection is unstable. So I don't know where you basically like heard me last, but
Once you get comfortable with that movement.
yeah, comfortable with that movement, you can start exploring middle ground on the other side of the neck first, like completely flat, completely fist. What if I curl like halfway? What if I curl a bit more? What if I curl completely? Like exploring what is the spot which is most comfortable and what's triggering. And then move between comfortable and slightly triggering, maybe synchronizing the whole thing with the breath. So whenever I'm touching at the beginning, I'm breathing out, I go like, that's my fingers. And then I can start working on individual fingers. So basically trying to find what still works, what are the things I can still do, and then start working with specifics. And with the movement, like with the actual movement, I would start working on something like a water bottle or a thin book or something. Like seeing if function is still available in a different environment. Mm-hmm. Because if I can do it here, like moving my fingers separately, and I practice that and I make it comfortable, and I work on the sensory stuff on the other hand, on the bass, then I can get those two building blocks at some point and build them together and move my fingers separately on the bass. And I would definitely go with, first, don't even try to push down the strings. I work with violinists, I work with cellists, double bass players. That's a huge thing because they generally have a lot of force pushing the string down. So first, it's only sensory, it's only gently touching, just feeling that string under the finger. And then you can start expressing a little bit of force. But when you start, retraining, you can't go all the way in the first. You always have to build every single aspect of that playing bit by bit and always monitor what is triggering, what is not.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Would you say that it's, sorry, would you say that it's fair to, is it fair to say that doing stuff like that is basically proving to yourself that you are capable?
Yeah. And that's a huge thing in building self-esteem. Mm-hmm. Because basically that's a huge thing everyone struggles with when they get vocal dystonia, that I can't. And if you give yourself a small task, and you can, and then you can do a little bit more the next day and a little bit more the next day, that builds self-esteem. You just have to trust the journey. And sometimes it takes a lot of time to get used to that. I can, and it doesn't feel like playing the instrument. I still remember I was like making like decent sound on like 2 octaves, and I didn't feel like I was like, feeling that I'm just like playing a different instrument. And to this day, I remember when it clicked and it's like, now it feels okay. Now it feels like, yeah, I'm home. I'm home now.
Yeah.
So just navigating through that tricky bit when nothing is really there, and just like go through the fog and trust that you're going to end up on the right spot, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So learn to trust yourself, learn to take care of yourself. And Angela, this is something that in one of our upcoming podcasts with just the two of us, I want to talk about, where it's, we end up, unfortunately, a lot of the mindset for musicians is that we are servants of the music. And so it doesn't matter what happens to us because we're servants of the music, but nobody starts an instrument because they feel that way. You start because it's fun and it feels like part of you. And so the instrument is serving you. And the more you remove the you from the equation, we start running into problems. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then the individual creativity just goes out the window as well. And with that, the enjoyment, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you haven't, again, with me not having had vocal dystonia, when I was in one of my dynamic integration classes, after I'd learned to become more comfortable in my body, still working on that. That's permanent work. But one day she just was like, if you want, you can open your case. If you want. If you don't, leave it alone. Okay. And she's, you know, continuing to talk. And it took me a good 5 minutes to want to open my case, but I did. Because I knew, like, I wanted to, but there was something stopping me. I didn't know what it was. I'm like, well, we're finally comfortable enough. We're just going to sit with that discomfort until it passes, you know. And then she was talking about, if you want to, you can pull it out. You can, you know, just put your hands on it. You can whatever, put it together, play a note if you want. And I remember I ended up going just for my bottom joint of my clarinet. I had 2 clarinets in front of me. You know, like I could have gone for any part of it. I went for the bottom joint, and I'm right hand injured. That's bottom joint. And for whatever reason, I went for the bottom joint, and she was talking about, you know, you can assemble it, you know, all that. And I'm like, I literally just sat there holding the bottom joint pretty much like this. I'm trying to get it on camera, you know, just loosely in my hand. And I was like, you know what? I actually really like the weight of the bottom joint in my hand, which is the weirdest thing to say out loud. But it was one of those moments where it's like, I forgot that I liked that, you know, and like, I forgot that my hand, again, not having dystonia, and I know it's worse with dystonia, but I forgot that my hand actually liked that feeling, because it became like, well, my hand is the problem, my arm is the problem, and the instrument is perfect, and it's all just me. And so then we just became afraid, you know. So if you're out there listening, just try to pick up your instrument pieces slowly and see what you like.
Sometimes I get people like just sitting with their drumsticks or their whatever comes up. But that reminded me, I actually had quite the opposite with one client. He was teaching quite high level, and he couldn't play at all. Very severe immature dystonia. But he was carrying his flute all the time to the lessons, to the class, and he would put it together and put it on the piano, like he could just like pick it up and, you know, show something. But he couldn't. But the first step I told him that, leave the flute home. You can't play it. Why bring it here? Stop it. And that was like a huge, like, because with musicians, like, our identity is just so quick, like so intertwined with our ability to play, that you need to make some space between those things. I am a person and I play the flute. I'm not a flutist. I stopped saying that. I'm a person and I play the flute. And it's 2 different things. And very often it's very hard to let go, that it needs to work exactly this way because I want it. And your body goes like, oh, honey, no, it won't. So the space you made, that you left your clarinet alone and then you approached it again. That's exactly the process we kind of need sometimes, just to let go of that expectation, let go of that fantasy, and see what it is there. Like, what is reality? Okay, reality is my mouth does that. This is reality right now. It doesn't matter that I, you know, played Mozart concerto like 3 months ago. This is my reality now, and this is what I have to work with. So yeah, that's also very, very like crucial moment. But I really love this story. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah.
So I think that this is it ties in really well with what we were talking to Mark about, that when you go to approach your instrument, whether you're playing or not, whether you're teaching or not, being taught, having that sense of forgiveness and curiosity and experimentation instead of rigid expectations is really important. It's not just frou-frou. Fun is important.
Yeah.
And as you're saying this, it's like it's important for getting out of dystonia too.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding that part of you which still wants to play, that child who first picked up the instrument, because it's so uprooted from us during like a professional education, with all the expectation, with all the perfectionism, with all the, no, if you don't win this competition at like 18, no one is going to remember you when you're 23. You have to do all these things and all these pressures, and then somehow we just like let go of that joy of playing. Yeah. It's very important to find our way back to it.
Yeah,
that is so good, so good. And I think this might be a good place for us to stop, because I think we could talk about this all day long.
Yeah.
You have said some amazing things, Anna. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, I'm thinking of about 5 people I want to send this to immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, this was an excellent chat. Yeah, I've got a lot of people I would like to listen to this to who don't have dystonia.
Right.
Like, but there was just so much good material here. So thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing.
And thank you for the research you're doing.
Yes.
For the research and the coaching that you're doing for and with people. And we're going to put the name of the person in Canada that you mentioned, Farias, put his information in the show notes. But is there anything else that you'd like us, if there's anything else you'd like us to include, please let us know. But how can people find you or get in touch with you or help you or anything?
I do have a website, which you can also put in the show notes. It's very simply musiciansdystonia.com. And there is a lot of information. I upload my scientific findings. So there are like a couple of like scientific paper-like things, a little bit simplified, summaries of published scientific papers, if someone wants to look at it. And I also have a blog with personal opinions. So like I try to have like 2 different batches of stuff, because what I think and what I teach is not always which is already scientifically proven. So I just keep those things clear. And yeah, you can contact me through the website, and I'm taking coaching clients all the time. I generally try to find space for everyone. So yeah, so the website is musiciansdystonia.com. And yeah, so please do get in touch if you have any questions, anyone who's listening to it, and or you want to have a session, or just, you know, just have a chat or share problems or anything. Because I really want to, you know, there is this saying that be the one you needed when you were younger. I literally have one supporting me through these 4 years, and I don't want anyone to go through that, because it was really difficult. So if there is just like something I can do from someone else, sitting, you know, being desperate, giving a piece of information, a piece of encouragement, I'd love to do that. So
yeah,
absolutely. We'll put all of that in the show notes, and you guys, please get in touch with Anna. She's obviously, you can tell she's a wonderful person with a wealth of knowledge that is ready to help. So you do not have to feel like you are alone or that this is a death sentence and your career is over, because it's probably not true. So thank you again for joining us. This has been a marvelous chat, and thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And see everybody next time.
Bye.